I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a number of issues which deserve attention, beginning with another Palestinian terrorist attack in Jerusalem, in which a van was deliberately driven into a group of Israeli pedestrians at the tomb of Simeon the Just in East Jerusalem, killing an Israeli Druze border policeman and injuring many more. Here's the video of the actual van. After driving his van into two groups of people near the light rail station, the Palestinian terrorist actually got out of his car and attacked Israelis with a metal bar until border police shot him, and he died later in an Israeli hospital. This act of murder is the second recent incident in which Palestinians have used a vehicle to run down and kill Israeli civilians. On October 22nd, a 3-month-old baby girl and a young woman of 22 were killed when a Palestinian drove his car into a crowd waiting for the Jerusalem Light Line at Ammunition Hill. Hamas has taken public credit for today's terrorist act of murder. It's taken credit. Hamas has taken credit for murdering with vehicles. And Hamas spokespersons have said today's attack was an act of revenge for events at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, where Israeli police clashed with Palestinians throwing rocks after Israel closed the Temple Mount in response to the Palestinian murder of Rabbi Yehuda Glick and the subsequent killing by Israeli police of the Palestinian who'd murdered Rabbi Glick. One Hamas official lauded the attack and called for more violence, saying that ultimately he was praising the car murderer as a heroic operation, and he called for more such operations. Well, following this in the news at 7 p.m. Wednesday night, we'll be speaking with Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the President's Conference, and we'll be addressing this brutal and callous and tragic act of Palestinian terrorism with him. So I hope you can join us for that program. But right now, we want to focus on another event in the news that's of immediate and perhaps personal relevance to American Jewry, Tuesday's midterm elections, which saw what many are calling, from both the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats, a tsunami of renewed support for the Republican Party, as the Republicans won big on Tuesday, far bigger than the pundits had predicted. The Republicans won back the United States Senate, which they lost in 2006, picking up at least 7 seats without losing a one. In the House of Representatives, the GOP also increased their majority and is expected to wind up with at least 246 seats, the GOP's largest majority since World War II. Which means, of course, that Republicans now control both houses of Congress, which Democratic President Barack Obama will now need to work with. The Republicans also did extremely well in gubernatorial races, winning surprising victories even in some states that had voted overwhelmingly for President Obama in the 2012 elections 2 years ago. Illinois, Maryland, and Arkansas elected Republican governors, and Massachusetts will have its first Republican governor since Mitt Romney. Only in Pennsylvania did a Democrat oust a Republican governor. Well, there's the eternal question to be asked in the aftermath of America's midterm elections. Is it good or bad for the Jews? And for some insight on this question, I'm pleased to welcome back to JBS the Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and a man who always brings a light to shine on Washington machinations, Ron Kampeas. Ron, thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So, Ron, with the Republicans winning the Senate, and with Mitch McConnell likely to become Senate Majority Leader, replacing Harry Reid, and with Senate committee chairmanships now going to Republicans instead of Democrats, what's it all mean, Ron, for American Jewry and, of course, for the State of Israel?
Well, the most immediate thing that comes to mind is what it means regarding Iran. What's happened until now is that Harry Reid, the majority leader until January the 1st, has obstructed votes that would enhance sanctions on Iran should should the talks with Iran fail, and should Iran restart or even reinvigorate its nuclear arms program, its suspected nuclear arms program. The Obama administration strongly resisted such sanctions, saying that they would be interfering with the talks underway between Iran and the major powers. Although essentially the talks are really between Iran and the United States, and Reid, did, as happens, they're in the same party, they cooperate. He did the Obama administration's bidding, and he blocked those sanctions from going forward. I've heard that there are already talks between some pro-Israel groups and some members of the Republican leadership to accelerate those sanctions.
So you feel now there will be a greater chance that Congress will be able to push the president in, we would say, a direction that would put more pressure on Iran when it comes to nuclear weapons?
Yes, I think so. I mean, but there is another date. There's another November date. We've been through the 4th. Now we have to look at the 24th, which is the deadline for for a nuclear deal. Now, will there be a nuclear deal? That's the question. If it all falls apart, the Obama administration has always said in background calls with Jewish officials, it's always said officially even that if it falls apart, yeah, we want Congress to step in and do what it does best, which in this case, which is to sanction. So, in a sense, if everything falls apart and it falls apart in not a good way, in a bitter way, then it wouldn't really have made a difference who won yesterday. You'd still have that dynamic.
Yes.
What the Obama administration's been saying. If they want an extension, however, I mean, okay, let's go to the other end first. If they get a deal, I think then it'll be hard for even a Republican majority Congress to try and to do anything that might hamper that deal, because it'll play as such, incredible news from a U.S. perspective. The Israelis, of course, are very skeptical of any deal, but it would be, there's a deal, tension between these two countries over 30 years is dissipating. Obama succeeded in preventing a corner of the world from going nuclear, ostensibly. I think it would be difficult in those circumstances for a Republican Congress even to resist that. The question is whether they want an extension on the talks. Robert Menendez, who happens to be a Democrat, who chairs currently the Foreign Relations Committee and is a senior member, he said today at a Conference of Presidents gathering that he would insist on passing enhanced sanctions as in exchange for not getting in the way of an extension of the talks.
Yes. So let me ask you about two individuals in particular. You've mentioned one, but we'll come to Menendez in a second. The expected new Senate Majority Leader is expected to be Mitch McConnell, who at one point looked like he might not win re-election in Kentucky and then ultimately won going away. Do Jews consider Mitch McConnell to be a friend of Israel?
Yeah, very much so.
Yes.
They see Mitch McConnell as a friend of Israel. I mean, he's from the establishment, the Republican establishment, the mainstream of the party. They have good ties with them. I think he's backed every in the pro-Israel initiative. He might not have signed his name because actually in the Senate that's unusual for leadership to sign their names to every single initiative. But he's thrown his weight behind every pro-Israel initiative. He's considered a friend. I mean, the interesting thing about Mitch McConnell is that one of his most hostile sort of colleagues within the Senate happens to be his fellow Republican from Kentucky, Rand Paul. And there is a feeling, certainly, of wariness within the Jewish community, within the pro-Israel community about Rand Paul, but certainly not regarding Mitch McConnell.
Okay. And contrast that for me. How did the Jewish community feel about Harry Reid? And again, you've mentioned him for a moment in relationship to the Iranian nuclear problem. But in general, how would he have been characterized by the Jewish community or the pro-Israel community, Harry Reid?
He's a big friend of Israel, no question. This Iran thing has to do with partisan politics of doing, protecting your president, your party's president, and letting him go forward. The Iran question, although there was a lot of skepticism about it within the pro-Israel community, particularly within AIPAC, people thought that the president's plan was naive. Nobody thought it was anti-Israel. Within, like I said, the mainstream pro-Israel community, if you go further right, they might have thought that. And so, Harry Reid was just seen as doing his job. He's like, Harry Reid credits the pro-Israel community with keeping his seat a few years ago when he faced a big Tea Party challenge. I think it was in 2010 from Sharon Angle. He got major donations. He's very close to them. He has, the sanctions that are in place, the sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table, toughest sanctions that ever there were before or since. Obama signed off on those sanctions, and Harry Reid helped shepherd them through the Senate. So no, he's a big friend of the Jewish community.
So in essence, Ron, has the Jewish community seen a trade of one pro-Israel senator for another, going from Reid to McConnell?
Yeah, they definitely see a pro-Israel Senate. What this does, as far as the pro-Israel Democrats like Robert Menendez is concerned, is it frees them from the shackle of having to protect their president in the Senate, because they don't.
Interesting. It frees them. You're saying
they don't have the power to protect them anymore. They don't have to. They don't. There are certain things they may be able to obstruct through the filibuster, but I don't see them filibustering any pro-Israel legislation. So they're not. They don't really have the political power to protect him. So they're free. If there is like an Iran sanctions initiative in the Senate that the Obama administration doesn't like, the senators can go to Obama. They can say, Democrats can say, look, we can't stop this. We want to vote our conscience. We want to vote what's politically wise for us to vote, and they're gonna vote for it. That's why I think that the Republicans don't need they're not going to have a problem resisting a supermajority or a filibuster, because they're going to get their own 55.
Yes.
Actually, maybe a couple not from their 55. Yes. And they're going to get a bunch of Democrats as well.
Okay. So now talk to me about what it means to lose the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And what I mean by that is, again, now that the Republicans have won the Senate, all of the chairmanships will go to Republicans. And the Jewish community has been very, very pleased with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez, and he has been extraordinarily outspoken for Israel. He will be replaced perhaps by Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. What can you tell us about Bob Corker? And again, speak in the general issue. What does it mean now that Republicans will be the chairs of Senate committees where there were Democrats?
Well, we don't exactly know yet what it means, because one thing that Harry Reid did is he sort of tweaked the rules so a lot of the decisions about whether to advance legislation or not to, because of course that's in both chambers of the Congress. That's the key power, whether you can stop legislation from moving forward or not. Chairmen in the House still actually have more power than a lot of chairmen in the Senate. So Harry Reid seconded a lot of that power to himself. Mitch McConnell wants to change a lot of the ways that the Senate is run. He might change that, return a lot of the power to the chairman, and they're able to advance legislation, and they're able to quash legislation if they don't like it.
Mm-hmm. So do you think the Jewish community and those who are pro-Israel will be disappointed in time with Bob Corker, if it is Bob Corker who becomes the Senate committee chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee? He is the ranking Republican member at the moment. Will it in any way in your mind either hurt or will it help Israel to have a Republican instead of a Democrat, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee?
The interesting thing about Bob Corker is he perhaps was not as enthusiastically pro-Israel. Doesn't mean he wasn't pro-Israel. It's certainly not as close to the pro-Israel community as Robert Menendez. One area that comes to mind, I know that he resisted signing on to certain pro-Israel initiatives letters. And one area specifically that comes to mind is that he vigorously, from the Republican side, vigorously defended the nomination of Chuck Hagel as defense secretary. He really did not like what his fellow Republicans were doing to Chuck Hagel, because Chuck Hagel, of course, was a former Republican senator, even though he became Obama's defense secretary. They had been friends in the Senate. He didn't like that. He never said anything specifically about the pro-Israel community. Can't imagine he was happy with some of the attacks that came from the pro-Israel community on his friend Chuck Hagel. And the irony of all this, Chuck Hagel's turned out to be one of the friendliest cabinet ministers in the Obama administration.
Yes. Yeah. So, do you hear anything? And I'm not sure it's. We're not waiting long enough. I don't know how long it'll take before word trickles down to your ear. But in general, do you think that the Jewish community of America, and by that again here, Ron, I'm really talking about the pro-Israel community, do you feel that they are pleased with the results of Tuesday's elections? And there were many American Jews and many pro-Israel American Jews who felt that the Democratic Party and that President Obama himself, in some way, not that he was anti-Israel, although every now and then you'll hear that too. It's not so much that he was anti-Israel, but that Obama kept doing things that just needled Israel and needled Netanyahu in a way that people were afraid would give the Palestinians the wrong idea about American ongoing support of the State of Israel. And so now we have a Republican Congress, in essence, and I'm wondering whether you think that Jews today are nervous, are they happy, are they celebrating, are they weeping? Ron, what do you think is going on in the Jewish community in the aftermath of Tuesday's elections?
You're talking about like Jewish voters, exit numbers, exit polls, and polling commissioned by J Street show that you have essentially the same numbers voting in the as you did 2 years ago, as you did 4 years ago in 2010. In other words, enthusiasm for Obama is nowhere. Well, it's not that it's not close. It's not what it was in 2008 when he was, the candidate who came out of nowhere. It's the Jewish support compared, let's say, to Jewish support for Jewish support for Bill Clinton. It's softened a little bit. It's still in the upper 60s, but the upper 60s for Democrats in this election is actually it's huge. Here's the one community that they can still count on. One of the interesting things is that I talked to the National Jewish Democratic Council, Rabbi Jack Moline, who directs it last night, and he was saying, I asked him, so what mistakes have they made, particularly with the Jewish community? He said, you know what? They had to get out the vote for the African Americans. They had to get out the vote for the Hispanics. They needed to have a get out vote for the Jewish community. In Georgia, where there was a close election for senator and where the Democratic candidate Michelle Nunn lost, he said they didn't have a get out the vote there, and there might have been enough Jewish voters there to make the difference. So you see, the perception is that your mistake with the Jewish community is not getting enough of them out to vote for you because they're going to genuinely support you. If you're talking the pro-Israel community, certainly what you say is right. There is a perception of tensions with the Obama administration. I think that people are looking forward to working with the Senate to have more congressional oversight of the Iran talks. The tensions aren't going away. There's a perception that there's a failure to communicate on both sides of the equation, both in Jerusalem and in Washington. And the heavy-handedness, the ham-handedness of the comments that are leaked off the record from one side or the other doesn't show a sign of going away unless they've learned their lessons from their most recent crisis. But then we said that during the last crisis.
Exactly right. Exactly.
So the mutual sniping goes on, and like you say, that's not. It's not good for the U.S.-Israel relationship when there's perceived to be such tensions, and it's bizarre because like Susan Rice keeps saying, functionally the relationship is great. So you wonder why people on both sides want to go against that image.
That's a very perceptive point. I want to make sure everybody understands. Ron is referring to the fact that when people are asked in Israel or the United States, how is the U.S.-Israeli relationship in two critical areas, the foreign aid, especially military aid to Israel, and intelligence cooperation? And what we've heard, Ron, is that in both areas, the United States continues to be remarkably supportive and close with Israel, and that I've heard that that there have never been better relationships in terms of intelligence sharing. And although there was a moment when the Obama administration seemed to be saying they were going to hold up some weapons to the state of Israel, the bottom line is, both in terms of Iron Dome and in terms of providing Israel with arms and selling arms to Israel, that the Obama administration has been superb. And so in that backdrop, people, as you say, are saying, if it's so good, why is there this carping and this sniping? And I was wondering, by the way, Ron, have you heard anything about this leak reported in Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg that Bibi Netanyahu was called a chicken bleep by someone in the Obama administration? And the suggestion is nobody would say that in the Obama administration unless it had a certain kind of hecture from within the Obama administration. Do you have any insight on that event?
Yeah, it's we've been writing about nothing since
Yes.
except that until the elections, thankfully, pushed that out of the headlines. I don't have what's interesting is I don't think that there was a kind of deliberate hector to get that out there. I think that there is a kind of poisonous atmosphere, particularly within the White House itself, regarding the relationships with Israel. What's interesting is like the Israeli press until now have covered this so much as an issue of tensions between John Kerry and Moshe Alon. John Kerry, and actually the State Department, they're actually very okay with Benjamin Netanyahu. Talk to them off the record. Talk to them after a few drinks. That he's not their ideal Israeli prime minister, but they say we think he was ready to make a deal. We think he was just defending from his perspective, the interests of the Israeli people. That's not where their hostility is. The hostility is in the White House, and that I think arises partly from this Obama administration having a very insular White House per se, where there's difficulties from other agencies like the Pentagon and the State Department in working with them. The most telling thing about all this is that the leak that came after that chicken bleep leak, in which somebody basically said Kerry was a space cadet.
Right.
But it's actually coming from the same place within the White House, the same mentality where, like, we all know what we're doing. Everybody outside is really annoying because they're interfering with us. So I just think it's like it was just a product of that atmosphere. There have been 6 years of accumulated tensions. They perceive Netanyahu as going around their back on a number of issues, particularly the Iran issue. They think that they really resent the fact that he addresses Congress directly. They don't think that's appropriate, and so it arises from that kind of back and forth.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Ron, you drink with members of the State Department?
I'm not saying anything.
Okay. You talked about the relationship between Moshe Alon and Kerry, and if I'm not mistaken, Alon had to apologize for a comment made about Kerry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think he released a statement, not quite apologizing, regretting the statement. Nobody ever actually says "I'm sorry" in these statements. That's the amazing thing. What would it cost them? But okay.
Yeah.
So, but he did release something about it.
Okay, then one more general comment before we have to wrap up. I'm watching all of the pundits last night as they analyze the results of the midterm election. And again, Republicans won a big victory in the Senate. They increased their margin of leadership in the House. They did extremely well in gubernatorial races. And I heard, one Democratic pundit say, the Obama era is over, and the Democratic Party now has to rebuild itself. I don't know if that's a bit of an overstatement, but it certainly reflected what many Democrats were feeling last night and maybe this morning and today and this week as a whole. And I'm wondering whether you think this will have any impact on the Israeli-Obama relationship. And the reason I say it that way is you just made a very insightful distinction between how halls of government, aspects of government, whether it's the Congress or even the State Department, relate to Israel, and how the White House has related to Netanyahu and Israel. Do you think the fact that Obama got this is being perceived as a defeat for Obama, in some way might this change in your mind the dynamic, in one way or the other, between Israel and the Obama administration? Will he? Well, will he have less juice, and will he, take a half step back, perhaps?
I think that it depends on how he handles the new Congress. I mean, people talking about this as the end of the Obama era too. 2 years before it ended, Americans, especially pundits, seem to be given over sometimes to hyperbole. We don't know yet what's going to happen in the next 2 years. Mitch McConnell wants to work with Obama on a number of issues. He might go out with a stronger legacy. The economy is picking up. You can, let's say you have a scenario where the economy is picking up, healthcare, his legacy program survives, gets more popular. You get closer to 2016, and let's say by then Hillary is seen as inevitable. That actually puts Obama in a relatively strong lame duck position, and the anger with Netanyahu has to do with the perception that he was waiting for this to happen so he could go around Obama and get the Congress to help him out. And so, that strategy, if Israel takes that strategy, could eventually backfire. On the other hand, it could be true. I mean, you could have, you look at, George W. Bush in his last 2 years, where he was domestically able to accomplish very little. He did have some foreign policy successes, including the Iraqi surge. He came very close to a peace deal, which a lot of people forget, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the Palestinians walked away from that one. But he and Condi Rice fashioned a peace deal that both sides should have been happy with. But on domestic policies, he was weak. Maybe Obama will have the same problems.
Ron, it is always wonderful to speak with you. I hope we see each other down at the GA. In the meantime, you keep doing this extraordinary work of yours, and I'll keep chasing you. Fair enough?
Okay.
Thank you very, very much. Ron Kampeas, the Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA. Finally, on a personal note, everyone here at JBS Shalom TV extends deepest condolences to the family of George Feldstein, who passed away yesterday in his New Jersey home at the age of 73. George Feldstein, a true genius, created a company called Crestron, which became a leader in the commercial and home automation industries. George was a pioneer in automation and multimedia distribution, and in 2004 he was named one of the top 10 most influential leaders in his industry, and soon after the Industry Trade Organization awarded him a Lifetime Achievement Award. But more important than his extraordinary professional accomplishments and his wizardry on the harmonica and his ability to bike 100 miles a day, George Feldstein was a profoundly righteous man who taught his 4 exceptional children and his grandchildren the importance of tzedakah, giving to others and supporting others. And no head of any global company was more beloved by his colleagues who worked with him than was George Feldstein. And lucky me, George Feldstein and his wonderful wife, Linda, are real fans of JBS Shalom TV, and became a very special part of my life. It was my privilege to spend time with George and Linda, and 3 of their 4 children, Dan, Ann, and Wendy, who took care of their father in a way that reflects the finest in the Jewish tradition's teachings of Kivud Av Aim, honoring one's father and mother. Simply extraordinary, as was their other son, David. And I know that George's family and all his legion of friends and admirers and colleagues will miss his sense of humor, his brilliance, his vision, and his company. Just being with George was very special, and I will too. And Linda, I know that George will live inside you and inside your children and your grandchildren every day of your lives. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, George Feldstein, the memory of the righteous, is for a blessing. That's in the news. My thanks to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Carol Lilienthal, our producer for this edition of In the News. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.